Hey everyone, Sam here at ModelChili Scale Models, and welcome to part 2 of my Perfect Grade Millennium Falcon build. And I've already constructed some of the maintenance bays from the underside of the Falcon. Let's get a closer look there. You can go check out part 1 where I constructed the mandibles, the docking ports, and completed the engine deck. And here's the other part. So at this stage I'm just doing a lot of the major sub-assemblies and painting them up, and then once they're done I'll start putting it all together. So I've done those two bays, and now I'm going to move on to the radar dish and some of the maintenance bays that go on the back. Alright, so now that I've got all of these bays attached, I really don't want them accidentally being popped out by being pressed, being accidentally picked up and putting your thumb through it, so I'm just going to apply a bit of glue to the attachment points. You know, the instructions don't say anything about glue, but better to be safe than sorry. Right, so we've got a couple of troublemakers here. These parts aren't fitting quite as neatly as Bandai's parts usually do. There's a bit of a, it wants to bow out, as you can see there, and this one doesn't quite line up here. So that's nothing that can't be fixed with a bit of glue. Alright, so moving on to the covers of the docking ports, and we've got another featherwitch grill that fits under there. So what I'm going to do for this is just put it in place and then dab a bit of glue over the top. Now just painting on a bit of black to where the grill will show through, so when you're looking through it you don't see plastic, you just see black. So just about to start work on the lower half, and as you can see here there's a nice deep gash where there's been a bit of battle damage, and they've actually provided a piece that fits underneath so you can kind of see the workings through the hole. But if I attach that now and paint it later on, I risk missing a lot of this detail because the paint won't be able to get underneath. So I'm just going to prime this black first and then attach it and paint it up later on. And I've done the same for the two lower maintenance bays. Primed them in black and then sprayed on the base coat of the insignia white. It's a very light sort of patchy coat because I'll be going over it again when I paint the lower half, but it's just so I can get all of the difficult to reach places painted before I stick it all together. Alright, so moving on to the cockpit, I've gone ahead and painted up the figures. It was exactly the same technique that I used in my previous build, so if you want to go check that out, I'll put a link to the previous video in the corner there. I've got Han and Chewie in the front, and for a change, the client requested C-3PO and Leia in the back seat. So it makes a bit of a change from my last build, but the painting and I was going to say construction, just the painting and the wash and then the flat coat and a shiny coat for C-3PO was all exactly the same, including the transparent yellow top coat for C-3PO just to make the gold paint pop out a bit more. Now, the biggest change coming up is that in my last build, I really struggled with the fact that Bandai provided decals for all of this really nice detail for the cockpit walls. But knowing Bandai decals are really hard to make them set onto raised detail, I just knew it was going to be impossible with these parts. There's some massive 3D details sticking out there, and laying decals over the top. Even with coats and coats of setting solution, you're just going to end up warping the decal and making it look a bit messy, I think. So what I did in the last build was I sanded off all of that detail and then just plonked the decals straight on top of the flat surface. And while it looked good in the hand, like looking at it straight on, it looked really good. Once it was all installed into the cockpit and everything was finished and the light was shining through from the back wall, the decals kind of disappeared and all you could see was the flat walls, really. So while it was a good solution at the time, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to attempt to keep all of the detail on and just paint the all the fine detail. But the first step is to paint up the back wall black while masking off some sections for the light to get through, and then I can start the detail paint. Alright, so there it is, nice and black, and these strips will let the LED lights come through. And now I'll just paint on some colour details. So what I've done is I've just gone and painted a few more details, and as you can kind of see, I went in with the tip of the hobby knife and just scraped away the paint from all of the places where I want light to shine through on all of the lighted buttons, and you can kind of see where I've done that with the light shining through from the back there. So once the LED is installed, you should see nice dots of light shining through all of those places. Now what I'm going to do next is put just little dots of transparent colours, yellows, reds, blues, in some of these places, just to give a bit of colour variation. And then I'll move on from there. Okay, so that's all the colour applied, and it's a little bit washed out on camera, but to my eye it's looking pretty good. Nice and bright blues, greens, reds, a little bit of yellow. Once it's all installed in the cockpit, it should come through a bit clearer. But what I'm going to do now is do a final flat coat and then move on to the sidewalls. So I've made quite a bit of progress on the cockpit, as you can see. But before I got too ahead of myself, I thought I'd just pause and explain what I've done so far. When I'm doing a lot of this fine detail work, getting the camera in the way can kind of slow me down a bit, so I prefer just to get on with it really sometimes. But I've not completely finished yet, so I can explain what I've done and show you a bit more as it progresses. So the back wall there, I'll just go over all the steps that I went through. I think I may have missed a couple when I was explaining a bit earlier. But I start off with masking off the light strips and then doing a black coat with the airbrush, just basic acrylic black. And I ended up doing about 4 or 5 coats just to block all of the light. You will need to do multiple coats, but remember to do thin coats because you don't want to mess up all of the detail. And then what I did was painted on the door frame. That was just kind of a tan colour, and then dark grey for the door itself, dark grey panels for there, and there. And then what I did was give it a gloss coat, just to protect all of that paintwork. Pulled off the masking tape, obviously. And then what I started to do was just get the tip of the hobby knife and just very carefully scrape away all of the little buttons and panels where I want light to shine through. So I did that next, and then what I did was put on transparent reds, greens, yellows and blues over some of the buttons to make the lights all the different colours. And you'll see some sort of lighter colour in the sort of recessed areas and around the edges. And that was actually Model Wash White from Vallejo there. And I just dabbed that into some of the lines that surround the panels, just to recreate some of the white striping that you see on the decals and on the actual cockpit set. It's a bit fuzzy from here, but from a distance and when all the lights are on, it kind of looks quite nice. It just adds a little bit more detail. And then finally I just went with a small flat brush, got a tiny bit of silver on it and brushed most of it away, and then just lightly brushed over some of the detail just to highlight it a little bit. And then gave it a flat coat, and what that did was kind of frost up the clear plastic, so it kind of makes the light spread out a bit nicer, a bit softer. And that was that done. Now for the side walls, I'm kind of still in progress here, but I painted up the 2 light strips, just silver and then white, just to make the white go down a bit easier. And then dark grey panels in some places. And then again, what I did was get a bit more silver paint on the flat brush, get out most of it, like 99% of it on the paper towel, and then very lightly brushed over all of the surface detail, and that really made all of the little buttons pop out. And it also gave a little bit of weathering to the panels themselves, a bit of streaks of silver. And then with a tiny brush, I just went and dabbed some white dots on a lot of the buttons just to make them stand out even more. And so what I'm going to do next is, as before, just dab on some transparent colours over some of those white dots. So again, just bring out all of the different lighted buttons. And same on that side wall. There, and again for the center console. Went and looked at a lot of reference photos and coloured some of these panels a lighter grey and kept the rest black. Then dry brushed it with the silver, and I'll go back and put some transparent colours on those when that's done. And it does look quite shiny now. That's just because of the gloss coat over the black that I did. I'll put a final flat coat once all of the colour goes down, and then I can finally start putting it together. Alright, so there's the cockpit all put together and finally complete. And I'm really happy with how that's come out. I was a bit worried at the start, deciding to ditch the decals and go for painting, because I was kind of in uncharted territory. But I think it's really paid off. So I'm really glad I went with that direction. And it just looks really nice with the light shining through from the back. That's going to look really cool once it's installed into the outer hull. And yeah, last time the decals actually covered up the lower strips of light towards the bottom there, so I'm glad I've let light through those bits for this one. Just really it adds a lot more light to the cockpit in general, and all of the lovely wall detail, all of the buttons and stuff there. So as you can see, if the decals were in there, you wouldn't really see them that much. You really see the shadows of the shapes a lot more that stick out. And yeah, so yeah, really happy with that. And now it's time to put it in its housing. Now there's a couple of alterations that I need to make to the lighting setup. So the two LEDs that go into the back of the cockpit get housed in this little plastic bracket. But the strange thing is that the front, there's just a couple of tiny little holes where the light comes through. So they've really gone out of their way to restrict the amount of light that gets through there. So what I did in the last build and what really ended up working well was just making these holes a lot larger, just to let more of the light through. And I'm just going to hack my way through it with this triangular file. I just kind of drill it out. It's just a really quick and easy way to do it. Now the second modification comes in because the LED unit slots in down there and points up towards the two wedges at the back of the cockpit wall, which directs light out of the two top light bars. But bizarrely, they've put this huge plastic wall down the rest of the back end. So basically any light below those two bars is going to get cut off. So that's a really strange decision they've done there. And I mentioned so in my last build. So what I did was I just hacked away these plastic walls just to let the light from the LEDs shine the entire way down the length of the cockpit wall there. So that's what I'll do again for this one. Now I just need to double check that these LEDs are actually working. Nice, looking pretty good. So that lets in a lot more light, especially below the two bars at the top. All of those lights are on. The door lights are working. So yeah, pretty happy with that. So with the cockpit module completed, I'll wrap up this part of the build. And I hope you've enjoyed watching so far. As always, if you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below. And I hope to see you in part 3, where I'll finish off the lower half of the build, and then attach the two halves together, and then you'll really see it coming together. So thanks for watching, and until next time, this is where the fun begins.